and welcome to the 2026 CSU Summit, our two-day online learning experience for emerging athletic communications professionals, young professionals, undergraduates and graduate students, interns, and anyone else curious about the field. This session will focus on developing your storytelling skills and the process of writing bios as an athletic communicator. My name is Ken DeBolt. I'm the Director of Athletic Communications at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. The 2026 CSC U Summit is presented by CSC U Committee, and I'm excited to serve as today's moderator. Thank you to those who submitted questions during registration. If you're watching live, you can submit additional questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'm joined by a group of industry professionals who are ready to share their career journeys and advice with all of you. To start off, I'd like each panelist to introduce themselves and share a bit about themselves. We'll start with CSC Hall of Famer Larry Happel, who has served with distinction at Central College in Iowa. Larry?
Hi, I'm Larry Happel. I've been at Central College I was athletic communication director for 45 years. Now, I guess officially retired, but still serving in a volunteer role. I did take a one-year sabbatical in the middle of it and worked at the University of Tennessee, which was a tremendous experience. But otherwise, always been involved in CSC, and otherwise, my whole career is at Central.
Thanks, Larry. At the Pepperdine Director of Athletic Communications, Conor McCorry, has won awards from the Football Writers Association and the Collegiate Water Polo Association. Conor, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Conor McCorry. I'm a director of athletic communications here at Pepperdine. We're a Division I school in Malibu, California. I'm wrapping up my first year here. And prior to that, I served a few years at Army and Harvard before that. So my career's kind of been at the Division I mid-major level throughout. And at every stop, I've kind of been able to work with different ranked programs at each stop, whether it's lacrosse, tennis, golf, water polo. So I've gotten to cover a pretty wide variety of sports over my career.
Thanks, Conor. And next we head to Westwood, where Vinny Lavalciti is the Associate Director of Athletic Communications at UCLA.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I'm in my fifth year here at UCLA. I work for our softball, our football programs, and our women's golf team. I graduated in 2020 from UCLA, came back after a year at University of Texas at El Paso, where I worked for their volleyball team. So I'm happy to be back home.
All right, let's dive right into it. The most logical place to start is at the beginning. So your school has made a hire, you've been informed, and now you need to start gathering information and putting together an announcement release. Larry, since you work at Central in Division III, why don't you take us through your process, and then we'll move over to the folks in Division I and the bigger schools and see how they handle it.
Well, with any release, first thing you've got to ask is who's your audience? And I think it's different for us than it is for Division I. We are focused, pretty much everything we do is focused on recruiting students because we're enrollment driven. And so you have to keep that in mind. And I guess you want to write just as you would write a regular release in terms of wanting it to be engaging, and don't just start out with, Joe Smith was announced as the University of whatever's basketball coach on Tuesday or whatever. Why should I be interested in this person, and what about them might be intriguing? If they've been successful, what does this mean for me? So, Don Randley, who taught at the University of Missouri School of Journalism and was there for several years, spoke at several what was then COSIDA conventions, and pretty highly esteemed. He points out, instead of just saying was introduced as the 8th Illinois State women's head basketball coach at a press conference in the Hancock Stadium Club, why don't you say the 10th winningest coach in Missouri Valley Conference history, or something about them. and that's something that's going to create some excitement.
Conor, why don't you take us through your process? I mean, I'm sure you've got a whole process of going through to find the information on the person that you've hired, and where are your sources, or what do you rely on and what don't you rely on?
Yeah, absolutely. And like as I mentioned, yeah, kind of different priorities depending on the program and the school that you're at, and also whether it's a head coach, you are kind of getting those messaging from your athletic director of why this hire was made, why this person is the right fit, whether if it's an associate head coach or an assistant coach, you're getting that messaging from the head coach of why this person is the fit here, or if you're hiring an AD, that comes from your university leadership. So I think it's kind of important at first to get those that basis down, and as Larry said, you can list off all the quick facts, of the record and the conference championships and whatnot, but it's really important to tie that into the goals and the vision for your athletic department and those in your program specifically that they're joining to, and specifically for one that I just did for a head coach, you're have to know your audience in terms of the broader community of campus might be looking at it as not just the fans of those sports specifically. So you really need to kind of introduce them, their background, and from my process, everyone kind of will do the reverse chronological of where they've been last, and listing off accomplishments there. But from my end, I'm trying to get those key messaging points out from leadership that made the hire, and also a couple of bullets or sentences just about the most important stats or details, like Larry mentioned, the 10th most winningest coach, or a coach that had reached however many NCAA tournaments in how many years, to really just kind of capture the essence of the hire. And some people might not read all the way through, but if they read the first few sentences, they'll at least have a gist of the background of the hire.
Vinny, we do announcements on the regular in this industry. Sometimes it's the blockbuster hire. It's a name everybody knows, and it's hard to summarize all of the great things that they've accomplished in their career. The opposite end of that spectrum is someone who's brand new into coaching and trying to make them sound impressive. How do you approach those two different kinds of releases, and what are your news sources that you use to build their information?
Yeah, if you have a larger than life figure that some of our programs here have, like for example, Elisa Fernandez working for our softball team, like how do you tackle writing her bio, or maybe makeshifting into something that you want written that's different from the previous SID? Like you have to, what Conor said, capture what they are in essence. One of the most prolific figures in the history of their sport is something that's safe to say at the top of their bio. Well, you have to do it justice and do them justice and their career justice, and really bring to the top of the biography what you think is most important to your readers, like Larry mentioned earlier about your audience. And then when it comes to maybe a position coach, for example, on your football team who's just getting a start, speaking with him and gathering information from that individual, or and seeing like, hey, what can I include here? What do you think is most important to you to include in your biography? Because you might have to do some on the ground research and figure out that answer for yourself. You're not going to be able to go online and search anything that immediately pops up. There might be a human interest story about him from when he was during his playing days, or ask him who maybe was the most influential figures in their coaching careers to this date. Some part of our jobs is being researchers and finding that information so that you can craft the bio that does them justice.
Related to that announcement, now you've made your announcement. What is your approach to writing that first bio for the coach? Okay, you've gone from the press release to writing a bio. Is it as simple as copy and paste, or is there a lot more that goes into it and it's a complete rewrite? Conor, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I definitely change it up a bit. I think a lot of the, results of teams, coached or teams a part of, that stuff stays the same. It can kind of be copy and pasted in a sense, but with your hiring release, you have, you see sometimes you'll pull up a coach's bio, say they've been at the school for 12 years, and there's a quote from the athletic director that hired them, and they've had, three ADs since then, and it's not really as relevant. So, I'm a proponent of taking those quotes out and cleaning up. And, my template, at least for bios, is to kind of have a headline of, their position when they joined the school, what season they're in, and for some, overall record. If that's something you want to highlight, is something that I would do as well. So, I definitely changed up just the formatting of it, where the new hire is the introduction and the why we're hiring this person, and to kind of try to build the excitement for the program. Where the bio is, if someone's doing a piece on them, if someone's covering your game or broadcasting for your game, they can really just look up, get the facts, how many years they've been here, what they've done here, and kind of more just facts driven.
Vinny, how about you?
Yeah, same thing that Connor said. I don't. There might be things that aren't as timely anymore with what was written in the release. For example, an old quote, or potentially that staff member was on a previous staff, and you have the former head coach written in the bio. You want to make sure that those are taken out. And then there are certain nitty-gritty details that I like to include in each of my coaches' bios, like the number of years they've been at the institution, number of years they've been coaching in general. Those are things that I think are very important to include somewhere in the top portion, just so your fans and media members have an understanding of how long they've been around. But yeah.
Larry, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the writing approach. We all know that statistics show us that people don't read nearly as much as they used to. How do you come up with that right mix between writing in a super concise manner that can be consumed by the impatient person on their phone, while doing justice to a coach who has earned head coach position, and any kind of awards that might go along with their accomplishments? How do you find that blend, or is there a blend? Is it still good writing is good writing?
Well, don't bury the lead. If you've got whatever is distinctive about this coach, whatever they've accomplished, put it up front. So if they only read one sentence, they've at least come away with knowing, wow, this is the second winningest coach in Big Ten history, or whatever. Not every coach is going to have those kinds of things, but there's something you can say about every coach. You want to create the impression the arrow is pointing up in whatever program they're leading. You create that positive feeling, and you still want to include all the information, but some of the more mundane information doesn't need to be first. And even in a bio, just as you would with any story, you want to engage the reader. The lead is so critically important, because the lead is when the reader makes a decision, I'm going to read more of this or I'm out. And if you don't write a good lead, they're not going to go any further. So you need to write something there that's engaging and is going to want them to read more. And like I said, the important information needs to be up front.
Conor, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I would just go back to, from, relevant information, and even if it's, you have a coach that's been there for 5 or 6 years, per se, kind of, just doing a sweep and seeing, especially if you have a note in there about, they've coached however many all conference players, or they've coached however many, players of the years, and, that especially when you transition through SIDs, some of that stuff may, slip through the cracks, or if you're, adding something, to update the most recent year, and there's another note that could get updated as well. And especially at the bottom too, if you're putting personal information about their kids' ages, or where they're they have a brother that's currently the coach at somewhere, that stuff is ever changing. So just kind of knowing what information you have in there that could change, and just make sure you're constantly kind of doing sweeps and updating.
Vinny, earlier you touched on reaching out directly to a coach to find out what's important to them. I should have touched on this point earlier, but what other sources are you using for information? Is it strictly that conversation with the coach, or are you looking at past employers? Are you getting their application materials from HR? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, in regards to coach releases or coach biographies, I should say, you know, I like to gather a timeline of where they've been. And for example, if you're working with a certain position group, trying to find areas that coach excelled in for certain years that they were with and making sure that is emphasized at some point in the biography. I do want to say, like, it's easy to fall into a trap where, say, a coach has been around for 20 seasons. It's easy to fall into a trap of writing a little paragraph for each of those 20 seasons. Um, yeah, now you're welcome to do that, but just know, like, the likelihood of somebody reading through the whole thing or trying to find a certain piece of information is going to get lost in there somehow or some way. So it's important to kind of keep things concise. One thing that I've done for my head coach is I've made a separate kind of file or a sport link that takes them to a different page that is a year by year summary of their career that gets the job done, while I'm also able to kind of keep their bio concise and contain the most important and relevant information. So you don't want to have a 5-page biography online.
I'm curious what all of your approaches are when it comes to the formatting and presentation of those bios. Is there a place for bullet points? We've seen a lot of people have taken to writing their recaps with bullet points. Have you incorporated those into coaches' bios? Tables. Are you including tables that list year by year wins and losses? Why don't we start with go right back to you, Vinny.
Yeah, for coaches, I'll include a table of a year by year summary with overall and conference records if it applies, if a postseason finish if it applies. Whereas for players, I think it's probably a safer place to include bullet points. Um, so there's a couple of different strategies that I've seen. I use a ellipses in between my notes. It's honestly all feel, and every SID is going to figure out the formula that works best for them. But it's going back to the point that Larry first made when we began this call. It's finding out what works best for your audience. I go back to my conversations that I have with media members asking about certain questions or broadcaster asking for a certain note, like, oh, those are things that I should probably include pretty high up in a biography or for a player I'm referencing. So I think the bullet point strategy works better for players, in my opinion, but some people might differ, and that's totally fine. And everybody has their preference for what works best.
Larry, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
No, I agree. And with Vinny, he's serving a lot of media, and that's one of his big audiences, and what they're going to use to craft a story might be different than the way we present it. So I think you have to tailor your approach to your institution, your situation, and even within Division III, that can vary dramatically. And within Division I, it can vary dramatically between UCLA and St. Thomas. They're both Division I, but they've got different audiences, different locations. So you have to think about that. But absolutely, the capsules, year by year records is a great thing to put in a table somewhere rather than trying to write it all out in a release or the actual copy. I mean, you want to keep it fairly short in terms of what you're writing.
Conor, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm going to assume you're in the same boat on this. So if I can, and if I'm wrong, just go ahead and add your points in. But how do you handle a coach who has not been successful yet, or perhaps has a losing season after a couple of wins that says, hey, you know what, I don't want that on my bio? Like, how do you balance the facts are the facts with the presentation and the role that coaches' bios play in recruiting and the information the media needs?
Yeah, there's probably a fine line there in terms of what, if they're asking to, take something out and, and I necessarily haven't dealt with that, but I think, my strategy there would be kind of asking them what they think would be in place of it. And, because I think, for any hire, we're kind of, circling all of our bases in terms of trying to highlight anything that we can, if the record's not there, we're talking about, even if it's an all conference honorable mention. Or one big win they had gotten, or even if it's searching for, hey, they beat this team or they hadn't beat them in 5 or 6 years in their conference, or if they were, and you talk about losing a record. I think this comes up even now. So more days where teams are switching conferences or switching from D1 D2 to D1, and they kind of have that initial maybe struggle when moving to that next level up. So just kind of having the context there is important to show that they're, hey, ushering in a new era, or bringing a program from where it was, and it's where it's more of a slower rebuild, and kind of just providing the additional details there.
Good point. And one that I'm going to put into practice as soon as we're done with this is we've struggled a little bit in the Atlantic 10 with our men's lacrosse program. So, but it is an adjustment, and it is a higher caliber from the conference we were in before. So, good point. Talking about student athlete bios, we touched on this a little bit when we talked about coaches that have a laundry list of accomplishments. What is your approach for the national player of the year that's on your roster versus the good kid who really helps our GPA and is active and has played in one game? Why don't we start with you, Larry? How have you handled that approach?
Well, there's no getting around the National Player of the Year's bio is going to be longer, and I'm not one to try and puff up. Well, I mean, I'll puff them up, but you don't want to have a long bio for somebody that's really not done anything. Say what you need to say and get out. So you need to have the facts in there. You need to have all the basic information, years lived, lettered, and your statistics and all that kind of stuff. But if you don't have anything else to say, then don't say it. But the other thing then is to make sure you want to have a fairly consistent format in terms of the way things are ordered. But again, don't hide if this kid holds the school record for assists or is third in this or that, put it up front. If they've been All-American, lead with that. As you're looking through there, you want to have them think of it as a reference that, that's often the way we use bios in our own offices. We use them as much for ourselves as for the outside audience. And when we're making award nominations and that kind of stuff, it's really easy for me then to go back and say, okay, this kid's two-time all-conference or won the Hustle Award as a sophomore. Something that I can put in there without having to go back through and dig that information out.
Conor, what's your approach on the kid that doesn't get off the bench or doesn't get off the bench very often? How do you write about a season where he went to practice every day and that's about all you can say?
Yeah, I think I do exactly that. I think there's definitely a few bios where it might just be a few lines. It's I still like the term sports information director for us. We're providing the information that's accurate and that's there. So if they appeared in 5 games and had 5 points and 6 rebounds on the season, that's what the bio is going to say for that season. And I've worked with teams where probably I've had 2 athletes on the team where I do have that bullet point list, and as we were talking about before, I'm a proponent of no bullet points for a coach's bio, but for athletes' bios, absolutely, for awards and honors, and even if only a couple athletes are kind of the ones that are consistently setting those program records or winning the conference awards or winning those major awards, as opposed to everyone else in the roster doesn't have it. That's just a best practice because people are going to be, that's the headline as we've been talking about, where someone, whether it's a broadcaster or someone's going to click on the bio that you want to highlight the All-American and the All-Conference awards right away for them. And even off of what Larry said, where it's for us as well. Like that's what I feel, for like our tennis program now. I have our career high singles and career high doubles rankings for those that have been ranked, and that's honestly it's good information. But I go back on it all the time for reference as well. So it's and that's a sport where If we talk about, if we're updating every season or week by week or however often, there's some sports where it's been very helpful to kind of go week by week and, updating career records or overall records for kind of some of those head-to-head sports like tennis.
That leads me into an excellent question for Vinny. How how often do you update player bios? Does it depend on the sport? So your marquee top tier team gets updated after every game, and your third level teams are once a year, or is it all the same at UCLA?
You know, it's a slippery slope you can go down. I think what I like to do for my softball program here is if there's a weekly award that's won, I'll probably update the career highlight section that I put at the top of each bio. And basically what that is, it's a bulleted list of their top achievements, awards, honors won as a player. And then usually when the postseason comes around, I'll do a yearly section of that season and just the nitty-gritty facts. Like it'd be their slash line, their average on base percentage, slugging percentage, home runs, doubles, triples, multi-hit games, just the most essential information. Um, and I would go about it that way for our softball program, whereas our women's golf team, I would since that season is separated into a fall and a spring increment, after each section of the year, I would update it. And then for football, it really um, relies on what player you're going to be doing the bio for. Our starting quarterback will probably get an updated bio each week. And if we have a player that's up for a major award, 2 years ago, we had a Buckus Award finalist. We're updating that thing as every award comes in, every game finishes. We're making sure that he has information that's correct and up to date for our broadcast crew and our media to write stories about. It's very important for those situations.
Larry, I'm going to guess that your answer and my answer to this question might be a little different from our younger colleagues. But what did you find to be the most time-consuming part of creating player bios?
Well, setting them up to begin with, setting up, but once you've got a template and so forth, then it gets a little easier. But yeah, it just takes time. And as far as, when you update them, it's kind of as time allows. With football, we're probably a little more vigilant because it gets more attention. But I would have a student worker come in each week, and that's all they did was update those things. So I could, again, when I'm doing award nominations or whatever, I want to be able to go back or if it's in a game and somebody has 24 points, well, is that their season high? I want to be able to have that information handy. So I try and update it as much as I can, but as you know, from a smaller school and a smaller staff, sometimes just time doesn't allow it. So you do the best you can.
Conor, we just had a question submitted by one of our attendees, and I'd like to throw this one out to you. They ask about get to know me type questions, which I assume could be anything from your favorite movie to your favorite food or your career goal, things like that. What are your thoughts on including those in bios?
Yeah, for sure. This is actually my first stop that we kind of have started including those, which just kind of goes into a more broader topic of kind of the university that you represent and kind of its mission and what you are, becoming from Army at a service academy. It's a little more different where we weren't necessarily wanting to broadcast a lot of personal information about the cadets as they're going off into the military after and whatnot, and it's a little more sensitive. And here at Pepperdine, we do kind of do a questionnaire with including favorite things and background and personal information that is more broad and kind of gives a more personable feel. While probably not being maybe as out there as some other schools, being a Christian university. And going back to even the last question about the time-consuming part, that would have been my answer. Is kind of the initial build of an athlete before they compete. Trying to get their high school or their club careers and travel and AAU, and that information is always shoddy, and they'll tell you they average this or they were the whatever leading scorer in this league and stuff. And that's stuff you kind of want to verify, and so you kind of have to poke around and verify some of that stuff. So that's probably been the more time consuming part on my end. But I do think it sometimes you'll see broadcasters pull out little nuggets from a personal thing, whether it's a favorite something they've done, or something like, oh, they used to play with this person who's a star now in the sport and whatnot. That's one of our questions that we have. Anyone notable that they've played with or played against and stuff, just to kind of give any other context. So I think it definitely just adds substance. And we talk about being intentional with what we put in. We don't want to just have a laundry list of every little thing about them, but it does make a difference and kind of can help out.
Vinny, on a related note, Conor touched on personal information. An old standby in bios used to be parents' names or even birthdays. What is UCLA's approach and your personal thoughts on including that sort of personal information on a student athlete online?
Yeah, I think we've kind of moved away from including the birth dates, as meanwhile, that's information that probably if anybody really wanted to find out, they could by your birthday post on social media. But I think having it readily available could be not the best thing in regards to like identity protection and things of that nature. Now, I do include like a parent's names, a sibling's name section. I don't really include last names, even if they are different, unless asked for by the student athlete or their family. Again, and when you're getting those questionnaire forms, I think it's important to include a section where you allow for your athletes to sign off on whether or not it can be released to the public. Um, it's a very important thing. And should you be working for a smaller team? Now, some of us might be the one or two SID at a D3 school where there's only two people in the office. So it might be more of an ask, but parents sometimes have been a huge help for me when it comes to gathering like information regarding stats, because maybe Max Preps isn't the most reliable news source anymore as it once was when I was in high school. It's not. So um, making sure you're able to use all the right people and tools to your disposal to craft the bio, meanwhile also protecting the student athlete too at the same time.
Yeah, and Max Preps probably is a little more reliable for a five-star recruit than the kid that walks on at a D3 school. So for us to try and find information, it's always a challenge. Larry, you touched earlier on burying the lead. What are other common mistakes you see people make, whether it be in their press release announcing or in coach or player bios, that people should avoid?
Well, leaving out important information. I want to know where the coach is coming from, what's their background, record. A lot of times I don't see a career record, those kinds of things. And just, not making an engaging first couple paragraphs. But yeah, just don't leave out relevant information, anything if you were put yourself in the shoes of a newspaper writer who's going to write a story about this, what information are they going to want to know about this coach? If you're as a recruit, what information are they going to want to know, and make sure you include that. And if the record isn't glossy, there's ways to write around that while still including it. And I guess the other thing I would say is, in terms of if it's not as good or whatever, I would say coaches shouldn't make excuses, but that's our job, is to make excuses for them. So I'm not afraid to say, well, in her first year, she inherited a squad that only returned one player from the previous season, and they endured a 4-29 campaign. But, the next year they did this or this, or, lost three key starters during the season due to injury. Those kinds of things include those rationalizations, I guess.
Conor, anything to add there? Any pitfalls you would encourage people to avoid?
Yeah, I think, one of them is maybe just, it can be repetitive sometimes, just kind of going, game by game, or, season by season, so just kind of changing up the language and the way that you present a stat or present, a notable game, just to kind of give some variety there. So it's not just, kind of the same thing over and over again. And also, I always try to throw in, like conference ranks or team ranks if someone led the team and assists or goals or something along those lines. Just adding that in because it's additional context. And there's probably a lot of bios out there where someone might have, led their conference or, led their team in something and that's not in the bio.
Larry, you wanted to jump back in?
Yeah, I'm just going to point out, I think the other thing is don't leave any unanswered questions. Um, if you've got a coach that's left kind of abruptly, um, but it was there's nothing nefarious that happened, nobody was fired or anything like that. Kind of make sure that that's clear. We had a situation a year ago where a very successful coach left abruptly in June. The coach was not planning to leave, just an opportunity came up because of family reasons that kind of decided he was going to do it. We gave the job to a young assistant. And so we made kind of the headline is not that this coach is leaving, but young assistant ascends to new role as such and such departs. And then we even put in quotes from the departing coach about what a great coach this young assistant is going to be, making it pretty clear there wasn't any, the guy didn't commit a crime. He's not, there's nothing that we fired him about. This was all above board situation. So don't ever put out a story where you're creating suspicion.
Sorry, brain freeze right there. Just got hung up. Vinny, has UCLA done anything that you would consider different or innovative with your bios? Is there's something that you would point to as, yeah, I'm really proud of what we've done with this, and it's succeeded because of X, Y, and Z?
I think it's not exactly anything innovative. It's just getting the bios up pretty soon after the season ends, if possible. I think all in all, our office does a pretty good job. I know it's easy the week after the season ends to kind of take it easy a little bit, but sometimes people will need the information pretty soon, and especially when it comes to things in regards to professional drafts and things of that nature. Like we do a very good job of updating the bios for those players who need it in a very prompt and timely manner. As far as innovative wise, I think what the general formula that a lot of our SIDs do is we'll do that career highlight section that I mentioned, and then below that we'll do like a career summary portion where it gives like a career snapshot. I know you could easily go to the career stats tab on your bio, but in that place, but the reason why we do is that it's readily available in one place, and you could read it off right there. So you can know how many career home run games that somebody has right off the bat. You don't have to go scouring for it in each year where it states how many multi-home run games there is. I think we do a good job of having like a formula of how we like to go about writing the bio for each season. There's probably about a list of 5 or 6 things that I make sure I include at the very top of each yearly recap for each player. And it's usually pretty heavy stats based. And then maybe I'll go into specific individual game performances. But that's it.
Conor, we all know we're in the NIL era, and the portal is seemingly always open. As a perfect example, I saw today that the young man who hit the buzzer beater to win the Division III men's basketball championship has entered the portal. So it is from all the way down here in Division III up to Division I, a fact of life. Have you made adjustments or differences in your approach to bios that were made to impact student athlete retention?
I wouldn't necessarily say retention from their end. It's definitely a responsibility of of every office to maintain and have the accurate information and to not be shortchanging them for lack of a better term in terms of their accomplishments and what they've done. And I'd say even it more so just knowing the for certain sports, like football and basketball, where the transfer portal is, very rampant, just trying to, do your diligence in terms of having it updated for, if you have a guy leave, knowing that another SID will probably be looking up that person's bio. And we've probably all been there where we are going to, write a bio for one of our new transfers or new players, and the information isn't there that you can find. So just kind of trying to be a good teammate, or an SID's SID, if you will, for lack of a better term, for just trying to understand the landscape, and that we're all kind of juggling the same issues, and need the same information, pending on roster change up and switches.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Connor's saying. Speaking as somebody who just hired a completely new football staff, pretty much solely from the same institution, James Madison University. I can't. Chris Brooks probably isn't watching this right now, but I am like infinitely thankful for what Chris did, and how up to date he kept his bios throughout the CFP. And he's usually like a one man operation there helping out with football, and he was super helpful in helping me get everything ready to go to announce our assistant coaches. And he played a big part in the work that I did in terms of rolling out everybody here. So you definitely might not know it, but you're for sure helping somebody out if somebody's transferring or you're hiring a new staff from that old institution. It's super helpful, and I think one of the most important parts of our job is to make the job for the other SID that you're working with easier, 1000%. And that's a huge way you can do that. One thing that I've noticed that some schools have been doing is deleting player bios right after a player transfers out. And I'll go search for somebody at X university, and like I can't find them. I'm like, they played 10 out of the 12 games last year. I know they were there, but the bio is not there. So some universities have certain policies in place, I'm sure, where they can delete them. But I would, getting on my soapbox here, I would advise against that because somebody needs that information.
Yeah, I might add too that it's one thing if a senior official in your athletic department walks in and says, "I want this person off our website."
Right.
It's entirely different to delete them, as opposed to we all have the ability to hide them from our roster and not lose that information, so that when Hobart and William Smith manages to get a transfer from UCLA, I can at least reach out to Vinny and say, "Hey, do you by chance still have that person's bio?" And have that information, rather than trying to recreate it, or just which would be less professional, obviously, and just say no. So I want to remind everybody, those of you watching us live, you can submit any questions that you may have about writing player bios or coaching announcements in the chat, and we will get to them as we move along. We are about the top of the hour, so we have about 15 minutes left in our schedule. Maybe while our attendees think about their questions, we can move on to one tip that you would pass on to the young people, either in this business and just getting started, or getting ready to graduate and moving into this business shortly, that you think you found most helpful when it comes to writing a press release or writing a bio, whether it be for a coach or a player. Larry, you've shared a ton of nuggets with us so far. Is there anything that you've held back for this one special moment?
Special, but my tip is steal. Okay, none of us has it perfect. Look around. There's so many great examples. We have so many great professionals in our organization. Look at other schools. When I went to Tennessee, I'm like, holy cow, these guys do their bios so much better than I do. I completely trashed the way we did them and copied what they do. And to this day, I mean, the way we do our bios here, you can see reflections of what I learned there. So learn from other people, ask. Like Vinny says, we're in this business to help each other, because nobody else will. We're leaning on each other. That's where you get the best ideas, and adapt it to your own situation. Doesn't have to be exact copy, but make it work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll jump in with mine. I think mine would probably be kind of just knowing your audience, especially in terms of sports that have broadcasts versus don't, like for, like basketballs and footballs, and we have game notes, but I think a lot of times if you're listening to a road broadcast, you it might be obvious at some levels where they're not reading the game notes, or see they have the player page pulled up on their laptop instead, they're kind of just going off that. So as opposed to maybe like a track and field or a sport that doesn't necessarily have live coverage at the events, but it's more so for family or for other people in the community where you want to just showcase their top times and record times, and going off of that as well, of the kind of being the SID part. And if you're covering a sport that's for say like a non-NCAA sport, like I've covered rugby, water polo, skiing, where there's not necessarily like a database or a stat page where you can just pull up everyone's stats. You kind of have to take responsibility, and you own being the record keeper and having all the accurate information for that team and for those athletes, because it's not as easy as going on to ncaa.com for those sports.
Vinny, did you want to offer your?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm only 27, so I don't know how much wisdom I have. But I think the biggest thing is like we're historians here too. It's part of our job to keep track of all this information. People are going to be utilizing this in some sort of manner, whether it's to help them, get a job in a different industry outside of sports. People will check back and read this if you look up their name. Just know it is being used. I can't count how many times like I've heard or seen people like reading bios on their phone, like if somebody's up at the plate, like trying to like, what's this person all about? Who are they from? Who are they? So it definitely is being used. Definitely got to echo what Larry said in terms of stealing. Like I learned almost everything from some of the SIDs in our office that I work with right now, in terms of, maintaining, shaping how I write the bios, like, keep on learning, and no matter what, there's always a way to get better. And that goes for everything as an SID. So.
I think back to my early days in this business as an intern in athletic communications here at Hobart and William Smith. I'm pretty sure it was my boss Eric Reicher who said that there are no original ideas. You look at it and say, oh, that was really cool what Pepperdine did. How can I adapt that? How can I scale that? We don't have the resources they do, but maybe I can find a way to do something similar that works for my athletic department. So good advice. We did have one submission. So I'm going to throw this out as a general question. Anybody that wants to jump in on this one. They said, as someone at a small college managing 19 sports with 300 plus athletes and being a 1.5 person staff, are there any tips about keeping track of accomplishments efficiently and effectively, or even going back to find missed accomplishments? This person said that they're a new SID with almost no previous records. It sounds like, if I'm reading this correctly, no previous records were kept in this office. So, suggestions.
Yeah, one thing I would say that we had done at Harvard and then I had brought here to Pepperdine now is we have a kind of like a shared document, like an honor board, we'll call it, where it's sport by sport, and the in theory, it's, some it works out better in theory than in practice sometimes. But when you do have a weekly award or any award really, that you'll add onto that document, because I think that's been, really helpful at all of my stops. Sometimes you'll get, whether it's, different departments in your office that aren't on top of all the awards or athletes, where they're like, hey, can you give me a few notes on, this team or on this athletes, because they're going to speak to somebody, whether it's someone on campus or a donor or someone related to the program, and they kind of just need that quick information, the quick hitters. So that's something that we've done that's been very helpful, at least to have kind of all the awards in one place, and at the end of the year kind of do team accomplishments too, like where they finished in the conference, overall record, most wins since whatever year. So I think that's been a big help for us.
Now, I would just add that's an overwhelming feeling when you're trying to do so much. And I would just say, just chip away, get kind of the most important stuff And then as you have time in the summer, then do a little more digging and flesh that out. And over time, you can get a little more robust information. But just hit the highlights is all you can do initially.
I would say that honor board, as you called it, is a great idea. I wish I had thought of that in my first year here. It was something that I developed in year 3 or 4. So I might add in that trying to work backwards. It sounds like it might be a situation where there's not a lot of information on the website as well. But if you have a news history that you can search in, trying to find those weekly awards and digging them out for a year or two going backwards, it might be a way to help you fill out the bios with information that's missing from your records. We are closing in on the end of our webinar. We did have one more question. I'm going to throw this out to the group if anybody wants to answer it. This person says, I have a coach who likes to do bio questionnaires with questions like favorite hobby and food. Would it be wrong to want to scrap these for more relevant questions?
I would say you got to pick your battles sometimes with coaches, and if that's what they want, then that's one that I think is fine to let slide. And you can kind of do the more relevant questions, throw those in anyway and kind of have them on top. Yeah, my overall message to that would be, pick your battles, and I think that's one's pretty harmless.
Looks like noddings of the head, so we're all in agreement on that one.
Yeah.
And I think with that, if we have no more questions from our attendees, I'd like to thank Conor, Vinny, and Larry for joining us and sharing your advice to students interested in careers in sports information. We appreciate your continued support of college sports communicators. I think this has been a great discussion, not only just for new people in the business, forming press releases for new coaches and coaches that have been around for a while, and bios for the coaches and players, but honestly, I was writing down notes throughout, ideas that I want to carry back to myself and share with my staff. So I appreciate everyone's input. Thanks to everyone who joined us and submitted questions. Please take a moment to complete our brief post-webinar survey to help us improve future programming. And thank you again for being with us today.